All right, I got cut off right at the end of the last bit about spontaneous abortion. I just wanted to make sure that the full explanation made it onto the video. So the idea is that from the female's perspective, it's obviously better to have offspring and have that increase in reproductive fitness. And so aborting a litter on the surface of it doesn't seem like an adaptive strategy for the female. But if the female invests a lot in those offspring, bringing them all the way to term, giving birth, making milk, feeding the offspring, and the male that she's mated with is no longer around, it's just a matter of time before she runs into a strange male who will kill her offspring. So spontaneous abortion allows her to basically restart reproduction in a situation where she's no longer around the male that she mated with, and she's coming into contact with strange males that are likely to be infanticidal. She can cease to invest in the offspring that she was growing in her uterus, and instead mate with a new male and produce offspring. So this will delay her reproduction, but if she does it early enough during the pregnancy, she can still successfully reproduce. Whereas if she carried that litter to term and lost them later on, she might not have the option of reproducing at all that season. So it's making the best of a bad situation. All right, I'm going to move on to the marsupial placental dichotomy. And so now that we've talked about all the aspects of reproduction, we've talked about metatherians and eutherians, there's a big contrast. Even though they both give birth to live young, there's a big contrast in the length of their gestation. So marsupials have a very short gestation period, placentals a much longer gestation period usually. Marsupials, the infants that are born, the neonates, are very incompletely developed, whereas in placentals, they're anatomically complete, even if they're not necessarily fully furred and their eyes may not be open. They're still more well-developed anatomically in terms of their organs and their limbs than marsupial babies. So why is it that basically marsupials are born at such an early stage of development? Why can't they have a longer gestation? Why aren't they born more well-developed? And the prevailing thought is that it has to do with immunology. So we're going to back up just a little and have a little quickie introduction to immunology. So all vertebrates have a well-developed immune system. Other organisms also have immune systems, but we're vertebrates, so that's going to be our starting place for talking about immunology. And if you look at the very basis for what the immune system does, its job is to recognize what belongs to you and what's foreign to you, because the things that are foreign to you might cause you harm. So that may be viruses or bacteria or proteins that come from other organisms that you've either eaten or a bee sting or something like that, something toxic that you've encountered in your environment that doesn't belong to you. Your immune system recognizes it and it defends your body from whatever that invading organism, pathogen, protein, whatever it is, might do to harm you. So its job is to recognize self and not self, things that aren't you versus things that are you, because you don't want your immune system to attack parts of your body. You want it to attack things that don't belong to you that might cause you harm. So if you think about what's happening in mammals that have internal development of young, you have something that is not self within the mother. The fetus is not self because it's not genetically identical to the mother. Only half of its genes come from the mother, the other half come from the father. So it's a new, completely different organism because of that. And the mother's immune system should recognize that as being a foreign object. And based on that the foreignness of it, you might think that it would be attacked. So how do mammals get around this problem? So in all egg-laying vertebrates, it's not an issue because the developing embryo is not in direct contact with the mother at all. When it's in the egg, there's a complete physical separation of the mother and the fetus. And the fetus gets its nourishment from the yolk sac, so it's self-contained, and there's not a problem with immunology. With marsupials, they have a, a degree of protection that exists for about the first 2/3 of pregnancy, and that's something called a shell membrane. It's actually made of keratin, same stuff that makes our fingernails and our hair and all kinds of other protein structures in the body. So it's made of keratin. It's an actual physical barrier that prevents the cells of the mother's immune system from coming into contact with the cells of the developing fetus. The problem with that is that it's a set size, it doesn't grow with the fetus, and so at some point the fetus gets too big to be contained within the shell membrane, and the shell membrane cracks open, and then the fetus is not physically protected. And at that point, the process of birth commences very, very quickly. So within a few days of that happening, the fetus is expelled from the uterus. In eutherian mammals, you have a whole system of protections. The outermost layer of the developing embryo is called the trophoblast, and that starts out as a layer of cells that makes a bubble. So it makes a bubble. The developing embryo is just a little piece of that bubble, and it's surrounded by extra cells. But then there's also, it creates a non-cellular membrane that serves as a physical barrier. And there's also production of hormones and other substances by the placenta, by the trophoblast portion of the placenta. So one of those we've talked about before, that's chorionic gonadotropin, and that maintains this physical structure of the trophoblast that creates a physical barrier between the developing fetus and the cells of the maternal immune system. But there's also a suppression effect by chorionic gonadotropin and by other compounds produced by the trophoblast that prevent the cells of the mother's immune system from mounting an attack against the fetal cells. So basically in the local area of the placenta and the developing fetus switches off the maternal immune system and allows that foreign object, the fetus, to continue growing without being attacked by the maternal immune system. And so that allows pregnancy to persist for a very, very long period of time, up to a couple years in some species of mammals like whales, for example. When you can contrast that with the metatherians, the longest pregnancy in metatherians is something like 7 weeks, 6 or 7 weeks long. So it's a huge difference, a huge expansion of the amount of time that the fetus can be held internally within the mother's body to develop even further. So the ramifications of a long pregnancy, then you can have young that are born much, much more well-developed, that can get up and run around as soon as they're born, like the guinea pigs that we saw in the video, like baby whales, like baby wildebeest. You also have increased structural diversity. So if you think about what happens to metatherians when they're born, they have to be able to climb kind of hand over hand with those really well-developed forelimbs from the birth canal to the nipples, and they attach there. So they have to take that journey without any assistance from the mother. And they do that with their front limbs. To be able to do that, they need a certain type of front limb. They need to be able to grasp with their hands. And so because of that, once that structure is developed and that baby marsupial is born, it's not going to turn into something completely different. So you're not going to be born with hands like this and then develop wings like a bat after you're born. It can't happen. Those structures are already differentiated to the point where they are what they are. So if you look at the front limbs of marsupials across a huge range of species, they all look basically the same. And you don't have the diversity of structures that we see in eutherian mammals. So there's no wings, there's no hooves, and that has all kinds of implications. That limits the kinds of places that you can find marsupials, because they don't have the ability to have flippers like dolphins. They don't fly around in the air like bats do. They don't run really quickly across the ground like horses and antelopes do, because they don't have hooves. They are limited to a small subset of types of locomotion because of this need to have grasping forelimbs very early in development. we're going to move now into um, looking at whether this difference in reproduction between metatherians and eutherians causes a huge disadvantage for metatherians. So we know that marsupials aren't found as many places across the globe, and the question is, are they inferior? Is it just a matter of, well, they're sort of protected in Australia where they're most diverse, there's very few eutherians there, and that's the only reason you have so many marsupials, because they couldn't compete if eutherians were in the same place? Or is being a metatherian just kind of different but equal? Is it a different kind of reproductive strategy that is not necessarily in and of itself inferior? So there are many lines of reasoning that metatherians are inferior to eutherians. They're found in less habitat types, so not in the Arctic, not flying around in the air, not in the oceans. There's less diversity of locomotion, so there's no flying or swimming marsupials. There's less diversity of foraging types, and that's mainly because of the places where they're found. So they're not filter feeders. They don't feed on flying insects, for example. There's no really huge marsupials the sizes of whales or elephants. They have less complex social organization. So no lifelong monogamy, no multi-male, multi-female groups that are constantly in association with each other. There are not as many species. So that's speciose, how many species there are of marsupials. They are fairly many fewer species than eutherian mammals. And the kicker is that it's only in Australia where you get the huge diversity of marsupials, and in that continent there's very little competition with eutherians. And since eutherians have been becoming more common in Australia because of humans bringing along dogs and cats and rodents and rabbits and livestock, the marsupials have not done so well. So it seems like where there's head-to-head competition, the eutherians do better. They outcompete the marsupials, and the marsupials decline in numbers. There are both eutherians and marsupials in South America still, but relatively speaking, there are more eutherian species and fewer marsupial species. I'm going to stop the video here before I hit my 15-minute limit, and we'll finish up with a fourth video.